Hello and welcome back to another HTML tutorial with me, McNerd321. Today we are covering tables. Now, as you can see, we've got a fairly complex tabley thing set up here. All the code is complex at least, even if it doesn't look it. Then down here we have a slightly simpler table. As you can see when I highlight it, you can tell where the table is split up. So this has 2 rows and 2 columns. I've called them cells because that's just easier when you're thinking about the code that's behind it, and then that's just so that the 2 tables were spaced out of it and didn't look like they were all part of the same thing. So we'll start by looking at this simpler table down here, and looking at the code behind that to get you started with tables. Now the code for that is down here. It is this section here. So as you can see, you begin a table with the table tag. Fairly simple, helpful that they've given it a decent name. Now to define a row, which is what you do first, you define it by rows, and then within those rows you put cells or TD elements which form the columns. So we'll start by defining a row, and I'll leave this going across the page so that it's a bit clearer to you in terms of the layout on the screen. And we'll have another row beneath it. That's complaining at me because I haven't put anything in it. Now let's say in our first column we wanted, I don't know, it to say hello. And so we would put that in that TD element, and that will come up in the first column on this row. Now if we wanted another column, we would add in another TD element, and within that we would say hello too. And then if on the next one we didn't want anything in the first column, we would just put an empty TD element, which it's probably going to moan at me about, but it works. And then in the next one we would put whatever we wanted to appear in /TD. Always remember to close off your things, kids. Right, so within this one we would say hello 4. So there's no hello 3 because we didn't feel like having it. So that should display as an empty cell or empty column on the left, which if we refresh, it does. It automatically ignores this, just doesn't put anything in there because we left it empty, and instead in the second column it puts hello 4. So that's how you define a table. You use TR for the row, so if you wanted another R, it would be another TR element, and then within that you put the TD for each column that you want to have content in. You couldn't just leave this bit out entirely because then it would put hello 4 in the first column underneath just hello. You would have to put in all the empty blooming things, and it's just a pain. But that is how tables are defined in HTML. So if we wanted something that was then right at the very end and completely abstract and not related to anything else in our table but sort of formatted in the same way, we would have 3 of these TD. I will put spaces in so it's a bit clearer for you to see. So if we wanted something on the third column, we would then put it in here. So this is going to be, I don't know what the number is, I've lost track. And then we would refresh the page, and you see that it's put it in like its own third thing. So if I highlight this, you can see that these are just empty, there's nothing there, but they are defined, so it has formatted this all the way over here in a third column on its own. Now this more complex table that you saw up here has headers and footers defined, which is why this bit is in bold and that bit says footer thing. And if you see when I highlight it, there are slightly bigger gaps between. That's just a way of telling that they are header and footer elements. It's not particularly important. But they are used because when you think about if you've got a massive table with loads of results on a web page and somebody wants to print it, most web browsers now interpret the head and they put that at the top of every single page. So if you had like column titles that were important for all the pages, then you'd want them on all the pages, and the web browsers will hopefully interpret the header tag and put that on every single page at the top. And the same with the footer tag, they should put that on every single page at the bottom. And then this bit in the middle is effectively just a normal table that goes in between the two. But the way it's defined is slightly different. You define it with the header first. So to do that we have our open table tag, and we close that off right down here at the very end. and then between them we start off with a T-head tag, which stands for table header. Then within that we basically define a normal table, except we don't use TD for the columns, we use TH, which, as you can see flashing up there when I hover over it, specifies that a cell in a table is a header cell. That will only work within this properly if you want it to go at the top of the page, but if you just want something to be in bold, then just use TH normally. So I could make this one a TH, and it would make that bold. If I refresh the page, you will see that. There we go, that one's now gone bold. But that is just, again, something to do with the formatting and CSS, which we will be moving on to next week. I'll be doing some simple tutorials on that, and sort of colours, bold, font styles, width, height, things like that, that are sort of the basics of making things look nice and interesting, and not just plain black text on a white background, which can be quite boring if you want to visit a really interesting and amazing website that you're creating. So we have the T-head, and then within that just normal table rows with TH columns defined within them. That gives us our table header. Now down here we then define the table footer. You would logically expect that the table body would come next, but no, you have the table footer. And within that again you do a table row, and then normally it's just sort of TD that you could use, but if you wanted the footers to be in bold as well, you could use TH. But these T footers and T headers are also helpful if you're formatting a table using CSS, and you'll see next week. They can be used so that all of these rows and cells have a slightly different font color or style to all of these rows and cells, or all of these rows and cells. You can define them as separate things, as you will see soon. But then after the T footer, you can then move on to T body, and in there you just dump normal rows and cells, again like the footer, but this time when it reads the page you see that it's put the body in the middle. So as you can see on the code, I've said T footer, and within that is footer thing, and it's put that at the bottom even though it's defined before the T body. So hopefully you guys get that, and that's a basic introduction to tables, basically explaining the difference between T header, T body, T footer, and how to define rows and columns like we did down here. And next week, as you can see down here, we'll be moving on to basic styling and CSS.